Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida Department of Criminal Justice, and in this video I will present part 2 of Psychopathy and Corporate Crime, a preliminary examination. This is based on an article written by Pardue, Robinson, and Arrigo, published in 2013 in the Journal of Forensic Psychology Practice, Volume 13, pages 145 to 169. In this article, the authors start off by analyzing several case studies in detail of psychopathy in corporations, and then coming back to the characteristics of psychopaths and traits of psychopathy, and correlating those with practices in corporate settings. So they start by talking about oil spills and how often the companies where there are oil spills have known that there are problems years before and neglect to fix these problems because they're costly. There also may be situations where companies know that if they are caught, they will be fined, but the fine often is much less than the profit they made by not fixing the problem or changing their harmful patterns of behavior. And we also have seen with oil spills major environmental damage, and often this damage is quite extensive, but PR firms sometimes are hired to minimize the damage that's done. And we often see a lot of lawsuits filed and fines and a lot of exchange of millions of dollars, but very few people tend to be prosecuted for these particular crimes. We also see crimes in the automotive industry, and often we hear about recalls of automobiles, and we then find out that the corporate executives knew about the problems years before, but neglected to take action because it would cost money. And again, sometimes trying to figure out, is it more expensive to fix the problem or to pay fines or lawsuits, which of course is a very immoral and unethical and illegal way of doing business. And we've seen that with a variety of malfunctioning products. We also have seen this in the financial industry. The 2008 economic crisis is an excellent example that the authors analyze and talk about. Companies getting bailouts, mortgage problems benefiting the companies and harming the homeowners, and with executives getting bonuses rather than prosecuted and so forth. And so we've seen this happen again. Certainly some executives do get charged and prosecuted, and some have spent time in prison for engaging in their illegal activities, but a lot of times there is not prosecution. If and of course, when you look at the the dollar amount, the health costs, or the destruction, you often find that individuals who commit similar crimes but at a much lower scale often will find themselves in possibly more trouble in the long run, or negative consequences, because it's difficult to prosecute. And you don't arrest an organization or a corporation. You have to go after specific individuals in the corporation, and that's difficult to find out who's actually responsible. Although I think that's been changing, especially with investigators having access to a lot of records that are kept through emails and corporate notes and things of that nature. But I think for our purposes, what we want to look at are the characteristics of these corporate executives or elites, as the authors call them, in terms of characteristics of psychopathy. Now, certainly, I'm not saying that CEOs are all psychopaths. That's not the case at all. I'm just saying when we begin to look at the nature of corporate misbehavior, we also want to look at whether psychopathy is characteristic at the higher levels of that corporation. And this could also go, one of the things when I was reading this, okay, I'll admit I do not have a lot of experience working in the corporate crime area. In fact, in my clinical work, I only saw a few cases of corporate crimes, and those were usually lower level management type people who often embezzled or had stolen something from the company, and so on. This situation is very difficult to study because there's very little access to corporate executives. I don't know any corporate executives myself, and I don't know how to get in touch with them, where to find them, how to talk to them, but some researchers may have those contacts or may have built them over the years and can write about this. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that I think a lot of this also applies to those who have engaged in mass atrocities. For example, genocide leaders, those that have led genocides. And again, that whole term leadership becomes problematic here. It's a big problem I run into quite frequently, because when I start thinking about leadership, I start thinking about when leadership goes bad, or evil leadership, or leadership that leads to destruction, rather than leadership which promotes health and harmony and peace. And so there's a big difference there. You could say that you have a very dangerous leader who is committing genocides and leading others to commit all kinds of mass atrocities. And when we talk, we talk about that person being a leader, meaning that they're leading a particular society or large group. But the whole idea of leader, in my view, doesn't imply value judgment that is good or bad, positive or negative, violent, non-violent. You have to actually look at the specific case. So I kind of use the term leadership in the sense of someone who leads and has followers, and they can be pathological, psychopathic, dangerous individuals, or they can be people who are helping and moving things forward and decreasing pain and suffering and increasing happiness and health. And then there's a lot of people who fall in between, of course. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm not the most popular person at the leadership seminar, if you know what I mean by that. Okay, so characteristics of these elites. And again, I would also include in here, when you're talking about elites, you're really talking about executives, those that are at the highest levels in corporations. So you are talking about corporate leaders. So we are getting back to that. So we're talking about when leadership goes bad, when leadership is evil, when leadership causes death and destruction and problems. And that's why I run into problems sometimes, is often if I'm going to a conference on leadership, they're talking about how to promote positive relationships and build relationships and network and solve problems, which would be a positive type of leadership. And when they ask, well, what do you study? I said, well, I study when leadership goes bad or wrong. Interestingly enough, I've never been asked to speak to an MBA program on corporate crime. I don't know, maybe they have their own people there that do that. But it seems like it would be an area that we'd be going in and talking about more and have, better relationship. And it occurs in other fields as well. For example, medical crimes. Again, almost it's hard to present. I don't have decent PR skills, and so I don't know how to go, to go into a hospital. So I like to talk about medical crimes. Oh, you mean people who do crimes against medical facilities? No, the medical facility committing crimes against people, against insurance companies, against their colleagues, whatever the case might be. So let's look at the characteristics of these elites. Okay, the glibness and superficiality of the leader, that they tend to hide or mask what's really going on. And often we'll see very skilled public relations firms hired to deal with these problems. A lot of times you even see that with stars and popular people or famous people, whatever you want to call them. When they do something, they mess up, they hire a PR firm who tries to spin it in a certain way. And when we see that frequently, that's what PR firms do, is public relations. They try to help their client or their organization to present the best possible face, if you will. And that's the next area, impression management. And here the corporate leaders really focus on being or presenting themselves in a very socially desirable manner. That's the term that the authors use, socially desirable manner. And so obviously with impression management, there's a lot of manipulation going on. And so you see that in some corporations. They have all kinds of exercises and rituals that bring people together, and also honoring their leader and all that. Grandiosity, that often these leaders have this real need to be admired by others. And they also have this sense of entitlement and arrogance, which is another problem if you're trying to interview corporate executives. And first of all, trying to get a foot in the door to interview corporate executives who engaged in criminal behavior is difficult enough, but then you have to deal with their arrogance and their sense of entitlement. And how do you deal with that? Trying to remain objective and not getting perturbed by that. Also, narcissism is something that we also see in these cases, that you have really kind of a narcissistic leader where they think that they can do no wrong. Whatever they're doing, it's good, or people just don't understand how smart they are and what they're doing, or they're doing it for the greater good of the corporation. And so you'll see that scenario. Often we see pathological lying, and that's with failure to report problems or minimizing things, minimizing problems. And we've seen that over and over and over again, where they say, well, we've had 3 cases of that occur, but then we see actually that there's 400 cases that they know about but haven't been officially reported in the statistics yet, or they talk about environmental impacts being much less damaging than they actually are. Also, we see that conning and that manipulativeness, along with a lack of remorse. That and we've seen cases before where an executive of a corporation that's engaged in criminal behavior gets up there and starts talking, and much of the public are furious because they give this really obviously scripted apology that's extremely not insecure, but insincere, and also along with that insincerity is that arrogance that you sometimes see. I can think of just cases after cases where you know, you're watching the interview on TV. I'm watching the interview on TV and I'm thinking, you know, there would be some choice words I'd like to say to that person. You know, the apology just doesn't go over well. And that's where public relation firms come in and smooth things over and bring in people who still manipulate and try to spin the situation for the least amount of damage, but do it in a much more socially appropriate way. Often they try to get someone who can relate to the audience. You know, corporate executives may have problems relating to audiences that aren't in corporate executive status. I wouldn't know. I don't know any corporate executives, really. I haven't been around corporate executives. I don't plan to be around corporate executives. I've met a few corporate executives for a few minutes, you know, nothing to form an impression. They seemed very nice. They dressed nice. They were friendly. They were outgoing. They smiled. They were clean. Their clothes were pressed. But, you know, but what I really want to look at is what policies are they making and what practices are they doing. So we also see that callousness and lack of empathy. And if a leader has that, what they're kind of producing down is a reduction in ethics and morality, you know, kind of giving the okay that it's all right to be unethical and immoral. And also there's a tendency to blame others for the problems. Yes. And also stimulation seeking, that sometimes when that's exciting to take these risks, to see how much money can be made and not care about the actual costs in terms of damage or destruction. In addition, we see irresponsibility toward the public, and we always have to remember that the corporate executive is responsible to the shareholders. And so that can be a problem in itself, that, you know, if there's a corporate executive who finds a big problem that's going to cost the shareholders, to me, that's someone that's doing their job. But to the shareholders, that's someone who's failed. And that's a big problem as well when there's that financial aspect over their head to produce at any cost. Also, there may be a parasitic orientation in the leader where they use others for their own gain and benefit. And when there are problems that occur, they blame others and have others take the fall for them. And there also may be additional criminal behaviors that they engage in, or the corporation engages in, related or unrelated to the one that we're focusing our attention upon. So there may be criminal versatility as well in these situations. There's case after case after case. I have a couple cases from other classes online that are on YouTube, rather, that you can see or search for or see in my YouTube channel. And again, this is an extremely important area for us to study, and we can begin to ask questions about you know, what makes an ethical, moral leader and what makes an unethical, dangerous, immoral, criminal-oriented leader, and begin to differentiate those styles and the dangers that are associated with certain leadership styles and patterns. And these authors have done an excellent job, in my opinion, of integrating psychopathy into the corporate boardroom. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.